I'm Isabella Grace, 26 years old, and I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. That Saturday morning proved me wrong. Walking into the bridal suite at our family estate to grab my grandmother's pearls, I found my sister Charlotte in my backup wedding dress, standing intimately close to my fiancé Michael, her hand on his chest as she whispered, "I should have been the one walking down that aisle today." The image of them together, dressed for a wedding that wasn't theirs, burned into my memory like a brand. What I did next would make them both realize that stealing someone's wedding day comes with consequences they never imagined. Have you ever caught family members betraying you on the most important day of your life? Drop your predictions about what Charlotte meant by that devastating statement in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because this wedding day revenge drama has twists that will leave you absolutely speechless. The favoritism toward Charlotte hadn't started that morning, it had been my reality since the day she was born 3 years after me. While I was the reliable daughter, who excelled academically and built a successful career, Charlotte was the beautiful one who charmed everyone with her personality and effortless social grace that made her the center of every family gathering. My parents had always treated Charlotte's achievements as more impressive and worthy of celebration than my own accomplishments. When I graduated summa cum laude from law school, the family dinner conversation centered on Charlotte's promotion to assistant manager at the boutique where she worked part-time. When I made partner at 25, becoming the youngest attorney in my firm's history, my parents spent the celebration talking about Charlotte's new apartment and her latest romantic relationship. Charlotte's relationships were always dramatic productions that required family emotional support and financial assistance. She'd fall passionately in love with men who were charming but unreliable, then cry on my shoulder when the relationships inevitably ended in heartbreak and financial difficulty. I'd provide both emotional comfort and practical help, often lending her money to recover from romantic disasters that left her broke and devastated. When I started dating Michael 2 years earlier, Charlotte's reaction had been predictably focused on herself. Instead of celebrating my happiness, she immediately began competing for his attention through flirtatious behavior that she characterized as being friendly and making sure he was good enough for my sister. Michael, a successful architect with his own firm, seemed immune to Charlotte's charms initially. He was impressed by my legal career and intellectual achievements, telling me regularly that my ambition and success were attractive qualities that set me apart from other women he'd dated. "Isabella, what I love about you is your strength and independence," Michael had told me during our engagement. "You're building something significant with your career, and you don't need anyone to take care of you financially or emotionally." The engagement had been a beautiful surprise during a weekend getaway to Napa Valley, with Michael proposing at sunrise overlooking vineyards that reflected the golden light of dawn. The ring was vintage Art Deco, elegant and unique rather than traditionally flashy, exactly what I'd have chosen for myself. But Charlotte's reaction to our engagement was immediately competitive rather than celebratory. She began making comments about how she'd always imagined having a wedding at our family estate, how she dreamed of wearing our grandmother's dress, and how she hoped whoever she eventually married would be as successful and handsome as Michael. The wedding planning process became an exercise in managing Charlotte's emotions and expectations rather than focusing on Michael's and my preferences for our celebration. Every decision, from venue decorations to menu selections, required consideration of Charlotte's feelings and input, with my parents encouraging me to include her in planning discussions to avoid hurt feelings. "Isabella, Charlotte just wants to feel included in your special day," Mom would say whenever I expressed frustration with Charlotte's tendency to make everything about her own preferences and opinions. "She's your maid of honor, and it's important that she feels valued and appreciated." Charlotte's role as maid of honor had been assigned rather than chosen, with my parents automatically assuming she'd hold the position despite our complicated relationship and her history of making my achievements about her own needs and desires. The 6 months of wedding planning were characterized by Charlotte's increasing involvement in every detail and decision, often overriding my preferences, with suggestions that reflected her vision rather than mine. When I chose simple, elegant centerpieces, Charlotte suggested more elaborate arrangements that would photograph better. When I selected a classical string quartet, Charlotte recommended a popular band that would create more excitement and dancing. More concerning was Charlotte's increasing closeness to Michael during the wedding planning process. She'd call him directly to discuss details that should have been between him and me, show up at his office to coordinate vendor meetings, and insert herself into every aspect of our celebration under the guise of being a helpful maid of honor. Michael's response to Charlotte's involvement was initially polite tolerance, then growing appreciation for her helpfulness and creativity in handling wedding details that I was too busy with work to manage personally. Isabella, Charlotte has such good taste and wedding planning instincts, Michael told me after several vendor meetings that Charlotte had organized and attended. She's really taking pressure off both of us by handling the details. But I was beginning to notice that Charlotte's help was transforming our wedding into something that reflected her preferences rather than ours, with Michael increasingly deferring to her suggestions and praising her organizational skills and aesthetic judgment. The rehearsal dinner the night before our wedding had been uncomfortable, with Charlotte giving a maid of honor speech that focused more on her own relationship with Michael and her role in bringing us together, than on celebrating our love and commitment. I knew from the moment I met Michael that he was perfect for our family, Charlotte had said, her hand lingering on his arm as she spoke. I'm so happy that Isabella found someone who appreciates the Grace family values and traditions. The possessive way she'd spoken about Michael and included him in our family before he'd even married me had been unsettling, but I'd attributed it to wedding stress and Charlotte's tendency toward dramatic emotional expression. That morning, as I walked toward the bridal suite expecting to find my wedding jewelry, and instead discovering Charlotte in my dress with my fiancé, I realized that her involvement in our wedding planning hadn't been sisterly support. It had been systematic preparation for the betrayal I was witnessing. The walk to the bridal suite had been routine and peaceful, part of my final preparations before the ceremony that was scheduled to begin in 2 hours. I'd left the suite 30 minutes earlier to have breakfast with my grandmother and get her blessing for wearing the family pearls that had been worn by Grace brides for 4 generations. The estate was buzzing with activity as vendors finished decorating the gardens and catering staff prepared for the reception. Everything looked perfect for the celebration Michael and I had planned, despite Charlotte's numerous suggestions and modifications throughout the planning process. I was thinking about how beautiful the ceremony would be as I approached the bridal suite, mentally reviewing the timeline for the morning and feeling genuinely excited about marrying Michael and beginning our life together as partners in both love and professional ambition. The door to the bridal suite was partially closed, which seemed odd since the hair and makeup team was supposed to be setting up for my final preparations. I pushed it open quietly, expecting to find stylists arranging their equipment and possibly Charlotte organizing the bridesmaids' accessories. Instead, I found a scene that stopped me cold and shattered every assumption I'd had about my sister's support and my fiancé's loyalty. Charlotte was standing in front of the full-length mirror wearing my backup wedding dress, the simpler but still elegant gown I'd chosen as insurance in case something happened to my primary dress. She'd done her hair in the exact style I'd planned for the ceremony and was wearing the family tiara that was supposed to be part of my bridal ensemble. But more devastating than the unauthorized wedding attire was her position with Michael. They were standing intimately close, her hand resting on his chest in a gesture that suggested comfort and familiarity rather than casual conversation. Michael's hand was on her waist, and they were speaking in low, urgent tones that stopped immediately when I entered the room. The tableau they created was like a wedding portrait, bride and groom in intimate conversation before their ceremony. Except it was my wedding day, my dress, and my fiancé participating in what looked like a romantic moment with my sister. "What is this?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm despite the shock and confusion of what I was witnessing. Charlotte's response was immediate but not apologetic. Instead of explaining why she was wearing my wedding dress, or why she was having an intimate moment with my fiancé hours before my ceremony, she looked directly at me with an expression that was defiant rather than embarrassed. "Isabella, we need to talk," Charlotte said, her voice carrying the tone she used when she was about to ask for something significant or deliver news that would require family accommodation and understanding. Michael stepped away from Charlotte, but didn't offer any immediate explanation for their intimate positioning or her appearance in wedding attire. His expression was guilty but also resolute, as if he'd been caught doing something he knew was wrong but didn't regret. "Isabella, this is complicated," Michael said, his voice reflecting discomfort, but also determination to have a conversation he'd apparently been planning. "Charlotte and I have been talking about some things that you need to understand." The formal way he was speaking to me, combined with Charlotte's wedding attire and their intimate positioning, was creating a picture I didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't ignore. "Why is Charlotte wearing my dress?" I asked, focusing on the concrete detail that I could address rather than the emotional implications of what I might be witnessing. Charlotte's response was the statement that would haunt me forever: "I should have been the one walking down that aisle today." The words hung in the air like an accusation and a confession simultaneously. Charlotte believed she deserved to be marrying Michael instead of me, and apparently Michael had been having conversations with her that supported or encouraged that belief. "What did you just say?" I asked, needing clarification of something that seemed impossible to believe. "Isabella, you know I've always been better at relationships than you are," Charlotte continued, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "You're focused on your career and legal work, but Michael needs someone who can prioritize marriage and family the way he deserves." The attack on my character and priorities was delivered with the same sweet tone Charlotte used for compliments, making the cruelty even more devastating. Michael's contribution to the conversation was equally shocking in its casual betrayal of our relationship and wedding plans. "Isabella, Charlotte and I have developed feelings for each other during the wedding planning process," Michael said, his voice reflecting apology, but also firmness about decisions that had apparently already been made. "We didn't plan for this to happen, but we can't ignore the connection we've discovered." The revelation that my fiancé and my sister had developed romantic feelings during my wedding planning process was so outrageous that my initial reaction was disbelief rather than anger. "You're telling me this on our wedding day?" I asked, still processing the magnitude of what they were confessing. 2 hours before our ceremony. Charlotte's response revealed that this wasn't an impulsive confession, but part of a plan they'd developed together. "Isabella, we couldn't let you marry Michael when he has feelings for someone else," Charlotte said, presenting their betrayal as concern for my well-being rather than selfish pursuit of their own desires. "It wouldn't be fair to any of us to go through with a wedding when the groom is in love with the maid of honor." The suggestion that they were protecting me from an unhappy marriage by stealing my fiancé on my wedding day was so manipulative that it finally triggered the anger that had been building since I'd walked into the room. But before I could respond to their betrayal with the fury they deserved, Charlotte delivered the final blow that would transform my shock into strategic planning for revenge. "Isabella, Michael and I are going to elope today instead," Charlotte announced, her hand moving to display an engagement ring I hadn't noticed before. "We wanted to tell you before we left, so you wouldn't worry about us." They weren't just confessing their affair, they were stealing my wedding day entirely, planning to leave me at the altar while they ran away together for their own ceremony. The cruelty and calculation involved in their plan was breathtaking. They'd let me complete all the wedding preparations, invite 200 guests, and prepare for the most important day of my life, only to steal it for themselves at the last possible moment. As I stood there processing the magnitude of their betrayal, I realized that Charlotte's involvement in every aspect of my wedding planning hadn't been sisterly support. It had been reconnaissance for the wedding she was planning to steal. The silence that followed Charlotte's announcement about their elopement plans stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My mind was racing through the implications of what they'd just confessed, while my heart was processing the double betrayal of my sister and fiancé choosing each other over me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. "You're planning to leave me at the altar?" I asked, needing absolute clarity about their intentions before I could process how to respond to such calculated cruelty. Michael's answer was delivered with what seemed like genuine remorse, but also unwavering commitment to the plan they'd developed together. "Isabella, we know how this looks, and we know the timing is terrible," Michael said, his voice reflecting guilt, but also determination. "But Charlotte and I can't deny what we feel for each other, and it would be wrong to start our marriage with this kind of deception between us." The irony of Michael talking about deception while confessing to an affair with my sister hours before our wedding was apparently lost on him. He seemed to genuinely believe that their betrayal was motivated by honesty rather than selfishness and cruelty. Charlotte's contribution to their justification was even more manipulative, focusing on my supposed shortcomings as a partner rather than acknowledging the calculated nature of their affair. "Isabella, you know you've been so busy with work that you've barely been involved in the wedding planning," Charlotte said, her tone suggesting that my professional commitments had somehow justified their romantic connection. Michael needed someone who could focus on the relationship and the wedding, and that someone turned out to be me. The suggestion that my career success had driven Michael into her arms was particularly painful because it attacked both my professional achievements and my worthiness as a romantic partner. But Charlotte wasn't finished explaining why she deserved my fiancé and my wedding day. "Michael and I have spent so much time together planning your wedding that we realized how compatible we are," she continued, her voice gaining enthusiasm as she described their connection. "We have the same vision for family life, the same priorities about relationships, and the same dreams about the future." The revelation that they'd been building a romantic relationship under the guise of planning my wedding was devastating in its deception and calculation. Every vendor meeting Charlotte had attended, every planning session she'd organized, every detail she'd helped with had apparently been an opportunity to seduce my fiancé. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, needing to understand the timeline of their betrayal and whether my entire relationship with Michael had been built on lies. Michael's answer was carefully parsed, suggesting that he'd thought about how to present their affair in the most favorable light possible. "Isabella, Charlotte and I started developing feelings about 3 months ago," Michael said, his voice reflecting practiced explanation rather than spontaneous confession. "We tried to ignore the attraction, but working together on the wedding made us realize how much we have in common." 3 months. They'd been conducting an emotional and possibly physical affair for 3 months, while I'd been working long hours to build my legal practice, and trusting them to handle wedding details that I was too busy to manage personally. But Charlotte's next revelation was even more devastating than the timeline of their affair. "Isabella, Michael proposed to me 2 weeks ago," Charlotte said, displaying the engagement ring I'd noticed earlier with obvious pride and satisfaction. "We've been planning our elopement since then, trying to figure out how to tell you without completely destroying your special day." The thoughtfulness they claimed about protecting my special day was undermined by the reality that they were stealing it entirely, leaving me to face 200 guests alone while they ran away to start the life that was supposed to be mine. But the most cruel aspect of Charlotte's confession was the obvious pleasure she was taking in revealing her victory over me in the competition I hadn't known we were having for Michael's affection. "Isabella, I know this is hard to hear, but Michael realizes now that he was settling for you because he thought I wasn't available," Charlotte said, her tone carrying false sympathy that made her words even more painful. "Now that he knows how I feel, he understands that we are meant to be together." The suggestion that Michael had been settling for me while really wanting Charlotte was designed to maximize emotional damage while minimizing their responsibility for the betrayal they'd planned and executed. Michael's response to Charlotte's cruel characterization of our relationship was telling in its lack of contradiction or defense of what we'd shared together. "Isabella, I'm sorry that you're finding out this way," Michael said, His apology focused on timing rather than the fundamental betrayal of conducting an affair with my sister. But Charlotte is right that we've discovered something special together. The casual way he was dismissing 2 years of our relationship and our engagement, while praising his connection with Charlotte, was devastating and revealing about his character and values. But I was beginning to process their confessions with the analytical skills that had made me successful as an attorney rather than just reacting emotionally to their betrayal. So your plan is to leave me standing at the altar in front of 200 guests while you two run away together? I asked, focusing on the practical implications of their selfishness. Charlotte's response revealed that they'd planned every aspect of their elopement timing to maximize their romantic satisfaction while minimizing the inconvenience to themselves. Isabella, we are leaving for the airport in 30 minutes, Charlotte said, checking her watch with the efficiency of someone following a detailed schedule. Our flight to Vegas leaves at noon, and we'll be married by tonight. The timeline meant that they'd planned to let me go through final wedding preparations, possibly even walking down the aisle, before revealing that the groom had disappeared with the maid of honor. You were going to let me walk down the aisle not knowing that you'd already left? I asked, horrified by the public humiliation they'd been willing to inflict on me. Michael's answer revealed a level of cowardice that was almost as disgusting as the affair itself. Isabella, we were hoping to tell you earlier, but we weren't sure how you'd react, Michael said, his voice suggesting that my emotional response to their betrayal was the problem they'd been trying to solve. We didn't want to cause unnecessary drama or make this harder than it has to be. The characterization of my natural reaction to being betrayed and abandoned as unnecessary drama was the moment I realized that Michael and Charlotte deserved each other, and that I deserved much better than either of them had ever offered. As I stood there watching them prepare to steal my wedding day and my future, I felt something shift inside me from devastation to determination. They'd planned this betrayal carefully and cruelly, but they'd underestimated the woman they were trying to humiliate. The attorney who'd built a successful practice through strategic thinking and decisive action was about to show them exactly what happened when someone tried to steal from Isabella Grace. Standing in that bridal suite, watching my sister and fiancé prepare to steal my wedding day, I felt something cold and calculating settle over me. The analytical mind that had made me the youngest partner in my firm's history was taking over, processing their betrayal with the strategic clarity that had won me cases against more experienced opponents. So you've planned this entire betrayal while letting me pay for a wedding you're going to steal, I said, my voice gaining strength as anger replaced shock. You've booked flights, arranged an elopement, and decided to leave me standing at the altar in front of everyone I know. Charlotte's response revealed that she'd expected me to react with devastation and pleading rather than the strategic thinking that was beginning to formulate a response to their calculated cruelty. Isabella, don't be dramatic, Charlotte said, her tone dismissive as she adjusted my grandmother's tiara in the mirror. People will understand that sometimes love changes, and the important thing is that Michael marries the right person. The casual way she referred to herself as the right person, while wearing my dress and preparing to steal my ceremony, was the moment I realized that Charlotte had been competing with me for Michael since the beginning of our relationship. Michael's contribution was equally revealing about his cowardice and selfishness in planning to abandon me at the altar rather than having the conversation months earlier that would have ended our engagement honorably. Isabella, I know this seems sudden, but Charlotte and I couldn't fight our feelings anymore, Michael said, his voice carrying self-righteous justification rather than genuine remorse. It's better that we are honest now rather than going through with a marriage that wouldn't be fair to anyone. The timing of their honesty, 2 hours before our ceremony after months of lies and planning their betrayal, revealed everything I needed to know about their character and values. But as I watched them prepare to leave me with the humiliation and financial consequences of their deception, I was formulating a response that would make them both regret underestimating Isabella Grace. Before you leave, I said calmly, I think there are some things you should know about the consequences of what you're planning to do. The confidence in my voice apparently surprised them, because they both stopped their preparations and focused on me with expressions that suggested they hadn't expected resistance to their plan. First, I continued, maintaining the professional tone I used in court. The wedding expenses you're leaving me to handle alone total $127,000. Since you're abandoning your financial obligations, Michael, I'll be pursuing legal action for breach of contract and recovery of all expenses I've incurred based on your fraudulent promises. The mention of legal consequences caused Michael's expression to shift from guilty confidence to genuine concern. He apparently hadn't considered that abandoning a fiancé at the altar might have financial ramifications beyond hurt feelings. Isabella, you can't sue me for changing my mind about getting married, Michael said, his voice reflecting uncertainty about legal territory he clearly hadn't researched before planning his betrayal. Actually, I can, I replied, enjoying the first moment of power I'd felt since discovering their betrayal. Breach of promise to marry is still actionable in this state, especially when combined with fraudulent representation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Charlotte's reaction to the legal threats was characteristically focused on herself rather than acknowledging the harm they were causing me. Isabella, you're being vindictive, Charlotte said, her tone suggesting that my response to their betrayal was more problematic than the betrayal itself. This is about love, not money. Then you won't mind paying me back for your half of the wedding expenses, I said, turning my legal focus to Charlotte's financial liability. Since you're stealing my ceremony, you're assuming responsibility for the costs associated with your new celebration. The look of panic that crossed Charlotte's face revealed that she hadn't considered the financial implications of stealing someone else's wedding rather than planning and paying for her own. But my legal threats were just the beginning of the consequences they'd face for their calculated betrayal. Second, I continued, I'll be informing all 200 wedding guests about exactly why the ceremony was cancelled and who was responsible for the deception and abandonment they are about to witness. Michael's response to the threat of public exposure revealed how much he cared about his professional reputation and social standing. Isabella, please don't make this public, Michael said, his voice reflecting genuine panic about community judgment of his behavior. This doesn't have to become a scandal that affects our careers and reputations. The irony of Michael asking for discretion while planning to humiliate me publicly by abandoning me at the altar was apparently lost on him. You should have thought about scandal before you decided to steal my wedding day, I replied firmly. I won't be covering for your betrayal or protecting your reputation at the expense of my own dignity. Charlotte's reaction was typically entitled, expecting me to prioritize her comfort over my own emotional well-being even after she'd stolen my fiancé. Isabella, if you tell people what happened, you'll embarrass our entire family, Charlotte said, her voice carrying the manipulative tone she'd perfected over years of making her problems everyone else's responsibility. Mom and Dad will be humiliated if their friends know that their daughters were fighting over the same man. The characterization of their systematic betrayal as fighting over the same man was so minimizing and manipulative that it strengthened my resolve to expose their behavior rather than protecting them from consequences. But my nuclear response was still building toward the revelation that would transform their triumphant elopement into a public relations disaster. Have you ever been betrayed so completely that you decided to respond with the full force of your professional skills and personal power? When you realized that people who underestimated you were about to learn exactly what you were capable of when pushed too far? Share your thoughts about wedding day betrayals in the comments below, because what I did next would make Charlotte and Michael regret ever thinking they could humiliate Isabella Grace. Third, I said, my voice gaining strength as I prepared to deliver the information that would destroy their plans, I've already spoken with the wedding photographer, videographer, and several guests about documenting today's events for the tell-all book I'm writing about family betrayal and wedding day fraud. The mention of a book and media documentation caused both Charlotte and Michael to go pale, as they realized their betrayal was about to become public entertainment rather than private scandal. You're writing a book about us. Charlotte asked, her voice reflecting horror at the prospect of her behavior being exposed to strangers rather than just family and friends. I'm writing a book about systematic family manipulation and romantic betrayal, featuring the case study of a sister who stole her siblings' wedding day, I replied, enjoying their growing panic. Publishers love real-life drama, and this story has everything: family dysfunction, financial fraud, and wedding day betrayal. Michael's response revealed how much his professional reputation meant to him, and how little he'd considered the long-term consequences of his selfish behavior. Isabella, you can't publish details about our private relationship, Michael said, his voice reflecting legal concern about privacy rights and professional consequences. Actually, I can publish anything that's true and in the public interest, I replied, drawing on my legal expertise to crush his hopes for discretion. And since you're planning to abandon me publicly at the altar, our relationship is no longer private. The transformation from confident betrayers to panicked co-conspirators was satisfying and revealed that they'd planned their deception without considering how I might respond to their cruelty. But the most devastating consequence was still coming, and it would teach them that stealing from Isabella Grace came with a price they couldn't afford to pay. The panic in Charlotte and Michael's expressions, as they processed the legal and public relations consequences of their betrayal, was satisfying, but I wasn't finished delivering the full scope of what their calculated cruelty would cost them. The strategic mind that had built my legal career was systematically destroying every aspect of their plan to humiliate me while escaping unscathed. Fourth, I continued, maintaining the calm professional tone that had intimidated opposing counsel in courtroom battles. I've already contacted Michael's largest client about the character concerns raised by someone who would abandon their fiancé on their wedding day after conducting a secret affair. Michael's face went white as he processed the professional implications of his personal betrayal becoming public knowledge among his business contacts and clients. Isabella, you can't sabotage my business because you're angry about the wedding, Michael said, his voice reflecting genuine terror about losing the architectural contracts that funded his lifestyle and professional reputation. I'm not sabotaging anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply providing character references when asked about someone I've known intimately for 2 years. Clients deserve to know if their architect lacks integrity in personal commitments. The revelation that his professional life would suffer consequences from his personal betrayal was apparently something Michael had never considered while planning to steal my wedding day. Charlotte's reaction was characteristically focused on minimizing responsibility while maximizing her own victimization. Isabella, you're being vindictive and trying to ruin our happiness because you're jealous, Charlotte said, her voice carrying the whining tone she used when consequences caught up with her selfish behavior. I am being thorough, I corrected. When someone steals your wedding day, you make sure they understand the full cost of what they've taken. But Charlotte's mention of happiness gave me the opening to deliver information that would shatter their romantic fantasy and reveal the investigation I'd been conducting while they thought they were deceiving me. Speaking of happiness, I said, reaching into my purse for the folder I'd prepared after weeks of growing suspicion about their wedding planning relationship, you should both know that I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago when I noticed unusual changes in your behavior. The mention of a private investigator caused both of them to freeze with expressions of horror, as they realized their secret affair hadn't been as secret as they'd believed. You've been having us followed? Michael asked, his voice reflecting outrage that I'd had the audacity to investigate suspicious behavior rather than trusting his lies and manipulation. I've been documenting evidence of adultery and fraud for use in both civil litigation and divorce proceedings, I replied, opening the folder to reveal photographs, financial records, and communication logs that told the complete story of their betrayal. The photographs were particularly damning, images of Charlotte and Michael in romantic situations during their supposed wedding planning meetings, including intimate dinners, hotel visits, and jewelry shopping that had clearly been for Charlotte's engagement ring rather than wedding planning. These photographs show 18 separate instances of adultery over the past 3 months, I said, spreading the evidence across the nearby table like exhibits in a legal case. Including the afternoon you spent at the Ritz-Carlton last week, while I was working late preparing for the Morrison deposition. Charlotte's reaction to seeing photographic evidence of her affair was immediate denial and blame-shifting rather than acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Isabella, those pictures don't prove anything inappropriate," Charlotte said, her voice reflecting the desperate tone of someone caught in irrefutable lies. "Michael and I were just planning your wedding and getting to know each other as future family members." The suggestion that adultery was actually wedding planning was so absurd that it revealed how disconnected from reality Charlotte had become in justifying her behavior. But the photographs were just the beginning of the evidence that would destroy their narrative of innocent love triumphing over my supposed inadequacy as a partner. "The financial records are even more interesting," I continued, pulling out credit card statements and bank records that revealed the true scope of their deception. "Michael has been paying for Charlotte's apartment rent, car payments, and credit card bills for the past 2 months, while telling me he needed to reduce our shared expenses due to business concerns." The revelation that Michael had been financially supporting Charlotte while lying to me about money was devastating evidence of systematic deception that went far beyond romantic betrayal. Michael's response to the financial evidence was immediate panic about legal liability and exposure of his fraudulent financial management. "Isabella, those payments were just temporary help while Charlotte was between jobs," Michael said, his voice reflecting practice lies that were crumbling under documentation and evidence. "Charlotte hasn't been between jobs," I replied, producing employment records that revealed another layer of their deception. "She's been working full-time at the boutique while lying to you about her employment status to justify taking your money." The look of shock that crossed Michael's face as he realized Charlotte had been lying to him about her financial situation was almost as satisfying as exposing their affair. But Charlotte's reaction revealed the entitled manipulation that had characterized her behavior throughout our lives. "Michael, Isabella is just trying to break us up with lies and fake evidence," Charlotte said, her voice carrying the manipulative sweetness she used when her behavior was exposed and criticized. "The evidence isn't fake," I said firmly. "And there's more." The private investigator had uncovered information that would destroy not just their current relationship, but Charlotte's ability to manipulate future partners with lies about her financial situation and employment history. "Charlotte has been conducting affairs with 3 other men during the same time period she was seducing Michael," I announced, producing additional photographs and communication records that revealed the full scope of her deception. "Including her former boss at the boutique, a married client of mine, and the photographer we hired for our wedding, who she's been manipulating for free services in exchange for sexual favors." The revelation that Charlotte had been conducting multiple affairs while positioning herself as Michael's true love was devastating to their romantic narrative and exposed her pattern of using sexuality to manipulate men for financial and professional benefits. Michael's reaction was immediate fury directed at Charlotte rather than continued partnership in their betrayal of me. "Charlotte, you've been lying to me about everything," Michael asked, his voice reflecting the shock of someone who'd believed he was special when he was actually just another target of systematic manipulation. But Charlotte's response revealed that she'd expected to continue manipulating both of us even after their elopement was exposed. "Michael, Isabella is lying about everything because she's desperate to keep you," Charlotte said, her voice carrying conviction that suggested she genuinely believed her own lies. "Don't let her jealousy destroy what we have together." The attempt to maintain manipulation in the face of overwhelming evidence showed how completely Charlotte had lost touch with reality in her pursuit of what she wanted regardless of truth or consequences. But I had one final revelation that would end their relationship and ensure that Charlotte faced consequences for years of manipulating and betraying family members who trusted and supported her. "Finally," I said, producing the most damaging document in my folder, "Charlotte has been systematically stealing money from our parents for the past year, forging checks, and using their credit cards to fund her lifestyle while blaming her financial problems on employment issues. The evidence of financial elder abuse against our own parents was the final blow that would not only end Charlotte's relationship with Michael, but potentially result in criminal charges and family prosecution. Michael's response was immediate and decisive as he realized the full scope of Charlotte's manipulation and criminal behavior. "Charlotte, you're a thief and a liar," Michael said, his voice reflecting disgust rather than continued romantic interest. "Isabella, I'm sorry for what we did to you, but I had no idea who Charlotte really was." The complete reversal of their alliance was satisfying, but also irrelevant to my plans for ensuring that both of them faced consequences for their betrayal and deception. As I watched their relationship crumble under the weight of truth and evidence, I realized that my nuclear response had accomplished exactly what I'd intended: complete destruction of their plans and exposure of their true characters. The complete collapse of Charlotte and Michael's elopement plan was unfolding exactly as I'd strategized while they'd been congratulating themselves on their clever betrayal. Michael's horror at discovering Charlotte's systematic deception and criminal behavior was destroying their romantic partnership, while my documented evidence ensured they'd both face lasting consequences for their calculated cruelty. "Isabella, I need you to know that I never would have gotten involved with Charlotte if I'd known she was lying about everything," Michael said, his voice reflecting genuine panic about being associated with someone facing potential criminal charges. "She manipulated me just like she manipulated you." The attempt to reposition himself as another victim of Charlotte's manipulation rather than a willing participant in betraying me was pathetic, but predictable. "Michael, you chose to conduct an affair with my sister while engaged to me," I replied firmly. "Charlotte's other lies don't excuse your betrayal or eliminate your responsibility for planning to abandon me at the altar." But Michael's desperate attempts at damage control were irrelevant to my focus on ensuring that Charlotte faced consequences for years of family manipulation and criminal behavior that extended far beyond stealing my wedding day. "Charlotte," I said, turning my attention to my sister, who was still wearing my dress and trying to process the complete destruction of her elopement plan, "the evidence I've gathered about your theft from our parents is already in the hands of both civil attorneys and criminal prosecutors." The mention of criminal prosecution caused Charlotte's manipulative confidence to crack entirely, revealing the desperation underneath her entitled facade. "Isabella, you can't send your own sister to prison over family financial misunderstandings," Charlotte said, her voice carrying the whining tone she'd used since childhood when consequences threatened her comfortable lifestyle. "Financial elder abuse isn't a misunderstanding," I replied coldly. "It's a felony that carries mandatory prison time, especially when combined with systematic fraud and identity theft against family members." The revelation that Charlotte's crimes against our parents was serious enough to warrant federal prosecution was news to Michael, whose expression shifted from romantic disappointment to complete revulsion at being associated with someone who stole from elderly relatives. "Charlotte, you've been stealing from your own parents?" Michael asked, his voice reflecting the disgust of someone finally understanding the full scope of her criminal behavior. Charlotte's response was characteristic denial and blame-shifting, refusing to accept responsibility even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of her crimes. "My parents give me money all the time," Charlotte said defensively. "Isabella is just calling it theft because she's jealous that they help me more than they help her. Forging checks and using stolen credit cards isn't parental help," I said, producing bank statements that showed unauthorized withdrawals and fraudulent charges. "It's identity theft and financial abuse that prosecutors take very seriously." The financial evidence was devastating in its scope and systematic nature, showing that Charlotte had been stealing from our parents for over a year while lying about employment problems and relationship expenses that required family assistance. But the most damaging revelation was still coming, and it would ensure that Charlotte's criminal behavior became public knowledge that would follow her for years. The district attorney's office has already issued warrants for Charlotte's arrest on multiple felony charges, I announced, producing legal documents that proved the criminal case was already in motion. She'll be taken into custody within the hour, regardless of whether she's wearing a wedding dress or sitting in a jail cell. The mention of imminent arrest caused Charlotte to completely abandon her manipulative facade and resort to the desperate pleading she'd used as a child when caught in lies and theft. "Isabella, please don't let them arrest me," Charlotte begged, tears streaming down her face as she realized the full scope of consequences she was facing. "I'm your sister, and family doesn't send family to prison. Family doesn't steal wedding days, commit adultery with sisters' fiancés, or abuse elderly parents financially," I replied without sympathy. "You chose criminal behavior, and now you're facing criminal consequences." Michael's reaction to learning about Charlotte's imminent arrest was immediate distancing and self-preservation rather than continued romantic support or loyalty. "Isabella, I want you to know that I had nothing to do with Charlotte's criminal activities," Michael said, his voice reflecting desperation to avoid being implicated in her legal problems. "Our affair was wrong, but I never participated in any theft or fraud." The speed with which Michael abandoned Charlotte, when her crimes threatened his own legal and professional standing, revealed everything about his character and the shallow nature of their relationship. Charlotte's response to Michael's abandonment was characteristic self-pity and manipulation, refusing to accept that her own behavior had created the consequences she was facing. "Michael, you can't leave me now," Charlotte said, grabbing his arm with desperate possessiveness. "We love each other, and Isabella is just trying to destroy our happiness with lies and legal threats." "Charlotte, everything Isabella showed me about your lies and theft is documented evidence," Michael said, pulling away from her grasp. "You're not the person I thought you were, and I won't be part of whatever legal problems you're facing." The complete dissolution of their alliance was satisfying, but also irrelevant to my broader plans for ensuring that both faced lasting consequences for their betrayal and deception. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway announced the arrival of law enforcement officers, who were there to execute the arrest warrant I'd requested be served during the wedding day that Charlotte had tried to steal. "Those are the detectives who are here to arrest Charlotte on felony charges," I announced, watching Charlotte's face go white as she realized her legal problems were immediate rather than theoretical threats. The timing was perfect. Charlotte would be taken into custody wearing my wedding dress, creating a lasting image of justice being served to someone who'd tried to steal what didn't belong to her. Michael's panic about being present during Charlotte's arrest was immediate and complete, revealing his cowardice and self-interest over any genuine concern for someone he'd claimed to love. "Isabella, I can't be here when the police arrive," Michael said, his voice reflecting terror about being associated with Charlotte's criminal behavior. "This will destroy my professional reputation if clients find out I was involved with someone facing felony charges." "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal my wedding day," I replied without sympathy. "The consequences of your choices don't disappear just because you're uncomfortable facing them." Charlotte's final attempt at manipulation was directed at me rather than Michael, using the family loyalty arguments she deployed throughout our lives to avoid consequences for selfish and criminal behavior. "Isabella, please call off the police," Charlotte begged, falling to her knees in my grandmother's wedding dress, as sirens became audible outside. "I'll do anything you want, give you anything you need, just don't let them arrest me today." "You should have thought about arrests before you decided to commit crimes against your own family," I said firmly. "Actions have consequences, and yours are about to begin." The knock on the bridal suite door announced that law enforcement was ready to serve the warrant that would ensure Charlotte faced justice for years of manipulation, theft, and betrayal disguised as family relationships. As I opened the door to admit the detectives who would arrest my sister in my wedding dress, I felt a satisfaction that was deeper and more complete than any wedding ceremony could have provided. Charlotte and Michael had planned to humiliate me by stealing my special day, but instead they'd created the perfect opportunity for me to expose their true characters and ensure they faced consequences that would follow them for years. Justice, I realized, was far more satisfying than marriage to someone who could be stolen by a manipulative sister who thought she deserved everything that belonged to other people. 1 year after Charlotte was arrested in my wedding dress, and Michael fled the scene like the coward he'd always been, I was standing in the courthouse steps as a judge sentenced my sister to 3 years in state prison for elder financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud charges that had expanded far beyond her crimes against our parents. The investigation that followed her arrest had uncovered a systematic pattern of financial manipulation targeting elderly clients at the boutique where she worked, romantic partners she'd deceived about her employment and financial status, and family members who trusted her with access to their personal information and credit accounts. Charlotte's plea agreement required full restitution to all victims, community service, and supervised probation following her prison term that would include financial monitoring and restrictions on her access to credit or bank accounts. The privileged lifestyle she'd maintained through manipulation and theft was permanently over. But more satisfying than Charlotte's criminal conviction was the complete transformation of my own life, freed from the obligation to subsidize her lifestyle and protect her from consequences, while receiving no appreciation or recognition for the sacrifices I'd made throughout our lives. My legal practice had expanded into a specialization that was personally meaningful and professionally lucrative, representing victims of family financial fraud and romantic betrayal in both civil and criminal cases. The expertise I'd gained from my own experience was helping other people protect themselves from relatives and partners who saw their success as community property. Ms. Grace, your sister's case made national news because it highlighted how family members can be the biggest threats to financial security and emotional well-being, a typical client explained during our consultation. We need help protecting ourselves from relatives who think our achievements create obligations to fund their lifestyle choices. The professional success that had grown from personal betrayal was deeply fulfilling, allowing me to transform my own victimization into expertise that protected other people from similar exploitation and manipulation. But the most significant change was personal rather than professional. 6 months after Charlotte's arrest, I'd met David Morrison, a successful surgeon whose respect for my strength in prosecuting family members for criminal behavior had created the foundation for a relationship built on mutual admiration rather than convenience or social expectation. Isabella, what impressed me about your story wasn't just your legal success, but your courage in choosing justice over family loyalty when those values conflicted, David told me during one of our early conversations. You demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and strength I want in a life partner. David's appreciation for my professional achievements and personal boundaries was refreshing after years with Michael, who'd ultimately viewed my success as less important than Charlotte's emotional needs and manipulative charm. Our relationship developed naturally without family interference or manipulation, since Charlotte was in prison and our parents had been forced to confront their role in enabling her criminal behavior through years of financial support and emotional protection from consequences. Mom and Dad's journey toward accountability had been difficult and incomplete, but they'd eventually acknowledged that their favoritism toward Charlotte had created a monster who saw family relationships as opportunities for exploitation rather than sources of mutual love and support. Isabella, we realize now that we failed both of our daughters by enabling Charlotte's manipulative behavior while taking your strength and success for granted, Dad said during one of our family therapy sessions. We taught Charlotte that she could avoid consequences through emotional manipulation, and we taught you that your achievements didn't deserve celebration or protection. The acknowledgement was validating but also incomplete, since my parents continued to struggle with accepting that their parenting choices had created a criminal who'd victimized her own family for years. But family therapy had established healthier boundaries around financial requests, emotional manipulation, and expectations that I would sacrifice my own goals to accommodate Charlotte's needs when she was eventually released from prison. Extended family relationships had undergone complete transformation as relatives processed Charlotte's criminal conviction and the evidence of systematic manipulation that had characterized her interactions with everyone who trusted and supported her. Grandmother Grace, now 88, had become one of my strongest supporters and regularly expressed pride in my courage to prosecute family members who'd betrayed and exploited me. "Isabella, dear, I'm proud of you for standing up to people who were stealing from you and lying to everyone," Grandmother told me during one of our weekly visits. Family loyalty doesn't mean accepting criminal behavior from relatives who think blood relationships excuse theft and betrayal. The family support I'd received after Charlotte's arrest was gratifying, but also highlighted how many relatives had witnessed her manipulation over the years without intervening or supporting me when I'd tried to establish boundaries around her entitled behavior. Michael's fate had been less dramatic, but equally satisfying in its demonstration that actions have consequences even when people escape criminal prosecution. His architectural practice had lost several major clients after his professional reputation was damaged by association with Charlotte's criminal case and his own behavior in abandoning his fiancée on their wedding day. The social and professional consequences of his betrayal had followed him for months, with potential clients questioning his reliability and integrity based on his personal behavior and willingness to abandon commitments when more attractive options presented themselves. But Michael's attempts at reconciliation with me had been rejected decisively and permanently, since I'd learned to recognize manipulation and cowardice regardless of how they were packaged or presented. "Isabella, I realize now that I made terrible mistakes, and I want to apologize for the pain I caused by getting involved with Charlotte," Michael said during his pathetic attempt at rebuilding our relationship 6 months after Charlotte's conviction. "Michael, you didn't make mistakes, you made choices," I replied firmly. "You chose to conduct an affair with my sister, chose to plan abandoning me at the altar, and chose to prioritize your own desires over honesty and basic human decency." The distinction between mistakes and choices was important because it eliminated the possibility of excusing his behavior through claims of temporary poor judgment rather than acknowledging his fundamental character flaws and selfish values. My wedding to David took place exactly 2 years after Charlotte's arrest, in a beautiful garden ceremony that was everything my original wedding should have been. Intimate, elegant, and surrounded by people who celebrated our love without any hidden agendas or manipulative expectations. The guest list included friends and colleagues who'd supported me through the legal battles and family chaos, extended family members who'd learned to respect my boundaries and achievements, and David's family, who welcomed me with genuine warmth and appreciation for what I brought to their son's life. But the most meaningful moment was when David's vows included acknowledgement of my strength in choosing justice over convenience when family members had betrayed and exploited me. "Isabella, you've shown me that love isn't just about emotional connection, it's about integrity, courage, and the willingness to protect what matters most even when that protection comes at personal cost," David said, his voice carrying genuine admiration rather than manipulative flattery. The wedding was funded entirely by our own savings and celebrated our partnership without any family financial manipulation or expectations that would subsidize relatives' lifestyle choices or criminal restitution payments. The prenuptial agreement we'd drafted included specific provisions protecting both of our assets from family financial claims, ensuring that our marriage would be built on mutual respect and shared goals rather than the exploitation I'd experienced throughout my relationship with my family of origin. As Charlotte's prison sentence continued and Michael's professional reputation slowly recovered from his association with her criminal behavior, I was building a life based on authentic relationships and ethical boundaries that protected my success from people who mistook achievement for obligation. The sister who'd tried to steal my wedding day had instead given me the gift of clarity about family relationships and the courage to demand respect rather than accepting manipulation, as the price of maintaining connections with people who shared my DNA, but not my values. Have you ever had family members betray you so completely that prosecuting them became an act of self-preservation? When you realized that choosing justice over family loyalty was the only way to protect yourself from people who saw your love as weakness to exploit? Share your experiences with family betrayal and legal consequences in the comments below, because your courage to protect yourself might inspire someone else who's being manipulated by relatives who mistake forgiveness for permission to continue harmful behavior. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama and justice-served stories. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to prosecute family members for criminal behavior, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable people who exploit family relationships for personal gain. Thank you for joining me on this journey from wedding day, betrayal to legal victory, and authentic love, for supporting my decision to choose integrity over family approval, and for understanding that healthy relationships require mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. Here's to building lives where our achievements are celebrated rather than exploited, where our love is reciprocated rather than manipulated, and where we have the courage to choose partners who enhance our lives rather than stealing our special moments. Remember, you don't owe anyone forgiveness for criminal behavior just because they are family, and you're not obligated to accept betrayal as the price of maintaining relationships with people who see your success as their opportunity. You deserve partners and relatives who celebrate your achievements rather than competing with them. Trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and never apologize for choosing people who value your character more than your willingness to be exploited. The sweetest victory isn't revenge or punishment. The sweetest victory is building a life so authentic and fulfilling that people who betrayed you can only watch from prison cells and damaged reputations, as you thrive with partners who actually deserve your love and loyalty. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept betrayal as normal family behavior, and choose relationships based on mutual respect rather than shared genetics.